Okay, so I've got this IKEA cushion cover that I've had for years, and it was just folded up, still with the wrapper on it, in my fabric box. And I think when I bought it, I thought there was 2 in the pack, but I didn't read the pack properly and there was only 1, so I've never used it. Anyway, I want to replace the cushion that I use to support my back on my computer chair. So I thought I would do something with this. Now, my original thought was, let me just open it out. I was going to stitch this design on to the front of this pillowcase. When I looked at it like this, I thought it looked too plain. Now, this design is a free design from Creative Fabrica, and it will be linked in the accompanying blog post here on my Apple Lover 53 website for you. It comes in 4 sizes. I chose the biggest size, and then I opened it in Embrilliance Essentials and I made it bigger. Now, you should be able to make it bigger on your sewing machine, directly on your embroidery machine. But the reason I did it in Embrilliance is because when you make things smaller and larger in Embrilliance, the software compensates for the stitches. So you're likely to get a better stitch out depending on how detailed the design is that you're using. Now, this one is kind of fairly sketchy around the outside, so it probably wouldn't have made any difference if I did this directly on the embroidery machine. But I just was sat at my computer, decided I wanted to use it, so I opened it in Embrilliance and I made it bigger. And this is how big I made it. Then I came and looked at this cushion cover and I thought, trying to stitch this on here looked a little bit plain, but then I also encountered another problem. The hoop that I'm going to use is my 8x12 hoop, which is a large hoop. Now, the first thing I thought of was I'll use the big hoop, I'll see if I can slide it inside and then flip the cushion cover over like you do with when you're doing a t-shirt and kind of hang on to the excess and stitch it. But because the hoop is so big, I couldn't flip the remainder of the cushion cover. So then I thought, okay, I'll undo a seam and I'll do it that way and make it easy on myself. But this IKEA cushion cover has been done with French seams. Then I came up with the idea of stitching this onto a piece of white fabric. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this cushion cover apart. So effectively, I'm just going to be using it just for the fabric. And then I'm going to put a piece of white fabric that's a similar kind of weight to this and stitch this design on it. And then I'm going to edge it with the front of this and use the back as a single piece. And rather than mess about trying to unpick the zip, I'm going to put a new zip in it. So the first thing I'm going to do is stitch this out, and then I'm going to cut this apart and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. So let me just move that to one side. The colours I'm going to use are black, as it's shown here mostly, black for the outline, pink for the inside of the ears, the heart and the nose, and the glasses I'm going to do in this pale blue. So I'm using Isocord black and this blue, which is colour 4240. And I'm using, I think this is Marathon, and this is 1022. As I say, I've already got my zip. This is the piece of fabric that I'm going to use. It's about 10.5 inches square. I've ironed it down the middle on the vertical and the horizontal so that when I put this on my hoop, I'm going to float this. I'll be able to line up the design, centre my needle over this middle crosshair, and then I know it's going to stitch out. So to save some time, I've already hooped my tearaway stabiliser, and again I've marked the vertical and the horizontal line just to give me an idea of where I'm going to stick this fabric, so I know that hopefully this design will all be centred when it's stitching out. So I'm going to get this stitching and then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with the rest of the pillowcase. I'm just going to apply a little bit of 505 spray to the back of this piece of fabric. And then I'm going to fold it up on that halfway mark, and I'm going to line that halfway mark, the vertical line and the halfway mark here on the fabric as best I can with those lines that I've drawn on my hoop. Now that doesn't look particularly, let's just see. Yeah, that's about right. So that's going to be floated. So anybody that's new to machine embroidery, this is called floating. This is where you don't actually hoop your fabric. A lot of people don't hoop because sometimes the fabrics are too thick. Like if you're trying to squeeze a towel in between your two, elements of your frame, it can be difficult. People don't like to hoop clothing because sometimes you can get a mark on the clothing where the hoop has been. Although I've heard, but I've not actually tried it myself, if you use a little bit of fabric conditioner in a bottle of water and spray where the hoop has been, that's supposed to take away what's called hoop burn. But to be fair, I float everything. So that's going to go into my machine, and then I can line this up, this centre vertical and horizontal line, with the line on my fabric. And then when I centre my needle, this should stitch centrally to this piece of fabric. So that's what I'm going to do next. So I'm just leaving that in place for now. I've already got my USB stick loaded into my embroidery machine. So I'm going to go to embroidery. I'm going to go to USB stick, and I'm going to find my design. Now in Embroidery Essentials, I added a basting box, but the only reason I added the basting box was to help me cut the design out as close to the edge of the image as possible. So the black square that you can see here on top is the basting box, and I don't actually need to stitch that. I could stitch the fabric down using it and then pick it out later, but I don't need to. So I'm going to skip that step, and then the first step of the design, if you like, is the pink. So I'm going to load up the machine with my pink thread, thread the needle. I'll just move you around ever so slightly. Don't know how well you're going to see this. I'll see if I can. So I'm going to hit the embroidery button to set the design on the screen, and then here at the bottom I have a needle with a plus and a minus sign against it. All Brother machines, as far as I'm aware, have this icon or something very similar. I'm going to select that, and then I'm looking for the bobbins that have got the plus and the minus. So all the stitches let you move your needle on your machine either minus or plus, so backwards or forwards in increments of stitches. I don't want to stitch the basting stitch, so I'm going to use the bobbin reels or cotton reels, which allow you to skip whole steps. So I'm going to click the plus once, and now you'll see that in the top right hand corner, this is what's going to stitch out, and it's the pink elements. So I'm going to start my machine and start stitching that. But before I do that, I'm going to make sure that the needle is centered over that crosshair, and it isn't. So the way to stitch this, the way to move this foot to get it over the center so that I know that the design stitches out where I want it to, is by just going back to the machine. Now if I started stitching here where this is, I'd say it's off by about 3/4 of an inch. So that would mean my design would be off centrally on my fabric by about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to come back to the machine. So this is where I went to use the plus and the minus, but these icons are lit up now. So this is what I want to use. I want to move the needle so it's in the middle of that crosshair, and I'm going to use these buttons to do it. So the first thing I'm going to do, let me try and get my little stylus. I'm going to use the down button, and that's going to bring the needle down. It looks as though it's on the line, it's just not completely centered. So I'm just going to keep moving it down. and it might need to go across one. So I'm not sure how well you're going to see this now, but the needle is directly in the middle of that cross, okay? Then I want to remove the basting box, so I'm going to go to this icon. I'm going to use the cotton reel and skip a step so that I'm back to the pink, okay, which is where I want to be to stitch the steps in pink. So I can close that down now. Everything looks as though it's set. The green button's lit on my machine, so all I need to do now is remove the paper and press go. I'm just going to stop that because I don't think the needle is threaded. Did I forget to thread the needle? I thought I'd done it. Let's do this and thread the needle. There you go. So now I can make sure everything's okay and start. So that's going to start stitching the pink elements of this design. So while that's stitching, I'm going to come back to my desk, and now I'm going to attempt to cut this apart. Okay, so I've just realised that I've just recorded a whole section of footage and I didn't have record on. So I'm just going to go over what I've done. So I think you saw me cutting the edges off the cushion cover. So that gave me 2 pieces of fabric, which was 19 by 19. So one of them I put on one side, that's going to be the back. And then the other piece I cut into 4 3/4 inch wide strips, because 19 divided by 4 gave me 4 3/4. So that's what I've got now. So I've got 19 by 4 3/4, 4 of them. And these are the strips I'm going to use to sew onto the piece of white fabric to edge it, which is then going to turn into the front of my pillowcase. So I hope that makes sense. So once this has finished stitching, you can see I changed from the pink thread to the black thread to do all the outline. The next step is, I think it's kind of like a white or a silver to put like a little bit of definition in the eyes, which I forgot to get out. And then the last step is the glasses, which is what I'm going to stitch in blue. So once all that's done, I'm going to take the embroidery arm off my machine, and then this just becomes a regular sewing project, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to put all this together. What I might do to save some time is overlock the edges of this fabric, just to help with stopping it to fray. If you've not got an overlocker, you could zigzag the edges. And if you've got an embroidery machine, don't be intimidated by it. They really are a great machine. I've not used this machine anywhere near enough as I should have done. I bought this in lockdown, in the first lockdown. I sold my Janome embroidery machine and I bought the Brother because the files are obviously compatible with the ScanNCut. And I absolutely love this machine. It's such a solid, robust workhorse. And I kind of made a pledge to myself at Christmas 2022 that in 2023 I was going to use this machine more. You know, these things are expensive, we need to use them. Don't be afraid of them. I'm in an embroidery group, and I see sometimes people saying that they've got a machine, you know, or they bought a machine or they've inherited a machine and they're scared to use it. Please don't be scared to use it. They're great machines. There's lots of information out there on YouTube. If you don't have the same machine as me, if it's a Brother machine, the principles are generally always the same. they nearly always have the same buttons. They might not have all the same features or the same amount of stitches, or they might not even be able to stitch as big as I can stitch, but the basic features are generally the same. So like when I'm showing you how to jump forward in steps in a design, or how to go backwards and forwards in stitches in a design, all the Brother machines will have that same feature. All the embroidery machines will, to be honest, but the icons, if you've got a Brother machine, should look the same as mine. So I'm just going to wait for this black to finish, and then I've got some white isocord thread out. I'm going to use that for the little detailed elements, which I think are just on his eyes or her eyes. It's a little girl, I think, and she's got nice long eyelashes, so I'm going to say she's a little girl, but you know, it can be anything. Okay, so that needs to now go to the next step. So I'm just going to rethread with the white and let it do its next stitch. So again, I'm going to cut at the top, pull this out from the bottom, and you know, you're only wasting about 12 inches of thread. In the great scheme of things, it's a lot easier to waste 12 inches of thread rather than have to take your machine in to be repaired because you've messed up the tension, you know, because you've pulled your thread out backwards constantly. So put this white in. Sorry if all my arms are in the way and everything. I'm just literally trying to thread it. I'm just going to pull that back out. So when I start to thread, I hold on to my thread so you're not pulling reams and reams of thread out. So I kind of hold it down here. I let, you know, about 16 or 18 inches drop free, and then I just hold it, and then I start to thread it around like so. Then when I get up to this set number 4, I let go and I bring it down, and then I thread it and I press the needle threader and let it do its work. So I'm going to put the foot down and see what this is going to stitch. So on the back of my office chair that I sit at to do all my editing and when I'm doing screen recordings and things like that, I've got a quilt that I made years ago, a pinwheel quilt, and the colours in it are all like pale blues and pinks and greens. So I'm hoping that this pale pink with the pink stitching and this little bit of blue in it will kind of tie it all together. So that's done that. So that was such a quick little stitch. So again, I'm just going to cut it, pull it out, and I'm just on to the last colour now, which is the glasses. And as I say, I'm going to do them in this blue. So I'm going to put the foot down, let this stitch the glasses, and then I'll be back when this is done. I'll probably speed this part up if you like watching it. I love watching embroidery machines going at full pelt on YouTube videos. So that's what I'm going to do for this section, and then I'll be back. Okay, so that's finished. I'm going to take it out of the machine. And this is how it's looking. So I'm going to undo the hoop. And I've started tightening my hoop up and undoing it with this hoop screwdriver that came with my machine. Because I don't know about anybody else, but I find that these threads on these metal bits on your hoop can be, you know, quite harsh on your fingers. So when I'm just putting it back together just to store it, I do it by hand, like so. But when I've actually got stabilizer in it and I'm about to stitch, I use this. So this is how it's looking. How fun is that? I love it. So now I'm just going to cut away, even though it's tear away, I'm going to cut it because I can sew these pieces together, or I can use them in my 4x4 hoop. If you just rip them apart, then you know you sometimes just end up with bits, don't you? So I'm going to leave the rest of this on. I'm not going to pick it off because it's just going to be inside the cushion. But I'm just going to tidy it up. I'm just going to put all those out of the way for now. So what I'm going to do now, so while that was stitching, I've gone round and I've overlocked all my pieces. Now my overlocker had black in, and to be perfectly honest, I couldn't be bothered changing it. So I've overlocked these in black, but it's the inside of a cushion. You're not going to see it when it's sewn into the seam. And I don't think anyone's going to be coming into my office and taking my cushion apart to see, you know, how I've sewn it together. So I'm just going to mark the centre mark. I've already got my centre mark in my white fabric from before for when I was stitching. And then I'm just going to line these up. I don't think there's a right or a wrong side with these. And I'm going to stitch across there, and that's going to fold up like so, and then I'll trim it afterwards. So I'm going to stitch the top and the bottom, then I'll trim it and I'll add the sides. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in a couple of clips and just clip this together. And then I'm going to flip it around, get another one of my strips, fold it in half, just give myself a centre crease. And again, I don't think there's a right and wrong side, and I'm going to line that one up. And then I'm just going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch it with some white thread and a straight stitch. But I just need to take the embroidery arm off my machine first, so I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so for the next part I'm just going to go into sewing. I'm going to choose a basic straight stick with the needle in the middle position. I've already got my white thread loaded up. I've got sewing thread in my bobbin, and I now just need to sew these sections together. So I'm going to bring this in and put it under the foot. Just going to remove that clip. I'm going to line the edge of my foot up with the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to press start. Going to make sure that that's still all lined up. Okay, so that's what I've got now. I'm just going to flip it around and do the other end. Okay, so this is what we've got. So I'm just going to finger press that up, and then I'm going to trim these off at the top and the bottom, and I'm going to do exactly the same with the sides. I'm going to then sew that on and fold that out, and that's going to hopefully give me a nice border all the way around in the pale pink to complement the white and the design in the middle. So I'm just going to bring my ruler back in and line this up on the edge, and I didn't need to sew those short edges because I'm going to cut them off, or I didn't need to overlock those short edges because I'm going to cut them off, but it doesn't matter, it's fine. I just was, you know, whizzing round with the overlocker. So I'm going to take that off. Might be able to do two at once. Let's see if I can line this up with the bottom edge, keeping it nice and straight. I'm hoping I'm doing this right, because I don't think I've ever done one like this before. I may have done, but can't remember. Okay, so that's what I've got now. So if I just turn it on the side, and then I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to line this up. This should fit more or less now, because it was all cut from the same piece. And sew down there. And do the same on this one, and sew down here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my machine, and away we go. And I've got my machine set to do a little lock stitch at the start, so that's why I'm not going backwards and forwards. It's doing it automatically for me. To line this up. Okay, so again I've just put a couple of clips in, and I'm going to sew. And it's not easy to do this when you've got a camera right in your way, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so this is what I've got. So I've got my strips sewn on the top and the bottom, and my pieces on the side. So this is just going to act now as any other piece of fabric would do. This is one piece of fabric. What I could do, I could top stitch around it if I want to, but I'm not so sure if it's necessary. I think I'm just going to leave it. And then the next thing is that I want to put the zip on it. Now the zip is going to go on the bottom. I'll just bring this up like so. So I've got my zip. My zip is a lot bigger than my fabric, which is fine. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to place my zip face down along the bottom and stitch, so that when this opens up, the back piece is going to attach to this, and then I'll sew the sides. So I'm just going to trim some of these threads, but I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to sew with the right side of the zip and the outer side of the fabric facing each other straight across. Now again, you can pin or clip it if you want to. I might put a few clips in just to hold it in place while I move it over to the sewing machine. And whatever the finished size of this is, will be the finished size of the piece that you've already, you know, put aside for the back, hopefully. I'm going to sew on the right hand side of the zipper as I'm looking at it. So I've positioned the zipper foot so it's on the left, and then I'm going to put the foot down just off the fabric but onto the zip, and then I'm going to sew all the way down. So I can move that first clip, stop if you feel uncomfortable. You know, it's not a race. You don't have to go paring down your zip and try and get it all done in one piece. If you do stop, make sure your needle is in the down position. I've got mine set that way. If you don't have that facility on your machine, just make sure you wind your wheel at the side of your machine so that the needle stays down, and then that way you won't mess up any stitches or anything. So I'm getting to near the end now. So I'll turn it round this way so you can see. So that's where I've just sewn, and then I'm going to open it out and I'm going to top stitch now just along here, and that way that will hold the zip out of the way when you're opening and closing it to get your cushion pad in it. So I'm going to take this back to the machine. I'm just going to finger press it. You could press it with an iron if you want, but if you're using a nylon zip, just try not to go over your zipper teeth because it could melt it. But I'm just going to hand press it like this, take it back to my machine and stitch along here now, and then I'm going to put the other piece on the other side. So I need to move my foot now so it's over this side. So I'm just going to take the foot off, swap sides. This is one thing I haven't got used to with having this Brother machine. On my Janome machine, you just moved the needle from left to right. With this one, from what I can see, you take the foot off and move the foot left to right. But so I'm just going to start it there. I can see where the hole is. It's going to hopefully come quite close to the edge. And I'm just going to do a top stitch. Now it just went over a few seams there, so I just had to give it a little bit of help, but it should be okay. Just going to pull it out. Trying to keep the foot in the same place. Back to that seam again, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of help over. Just stop my machine for a minute to get everything lined up again. Okay, so that's what I've got. So that's all top stitched down, which will keep this out of the way when you're doing the zipper. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to bring in the piece that's my backing piece, and I'm going to position this on top. So I've got my zip right side up, and I'm going to position this on top. Make sure that your sides are lined up, and put the edge of the fabric to the edge of the zip. Now when I did the quilt along, I showed you how to put a zip in the bottom of a cushion, and I did it a slightly different way. So I'll try and remember to list the quilt along video if you want to go and have a look at that. But this one I'm doing this way. So my thinking is that then I'm going to sew that down, then I'm going to top stitch it, then I'm going to open the zip, and then I'm going to put these together and sew the two sides and the remaining open top, and that should then enclose the zipper. And that's why I always tend to use a zipper that's bigger than my project. So this is going to go back to the machine now, and I'm going to stitch along and then do the top stitch again. Now if you're uncomfortable with sewing on the fabric, you can turn it over and sew on the zip, but I can see that mine's hopefully lining up edge to edge, so I should be okay. So I'm going to just keep going, but I'm going to take my time. So this is what I've got. And for some reason this side, the bottom side, is lining up, but this one's a little bit off, but it doesn't matter because when I sew it I can just encase it. And then I'm going to top stitch like I did on this side. Okay, so that's all nicely top stitched. So this is the important bit. You've got to open your zip. Okay, so I'm going to open my zip. I'm going to now fold this so it's right sides together. And I'm going to bring in some clips and I'm going to clip it together. Again, you can use pins if you want to. I've just kind of got into the habit of using clips because, to be perfectly honest, I was fed up with sticking pins in myself when I was sewing. So all I'm going to do now, I'm going to sew around here and the two sides. I've got the zip open, so at least when I turn it inside out, I will be able to turn it inside out because the zip's open. This side is just a little off, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to put some extra clips in it and just make it work. It's kind of okay up to about here, and then it just starts to go off, but I'm going to line up the edges. So I'm going to put a clip in my zip and I'm going to put a clip here, and I'm just going to make it work. It will just give me a little bit more give when I'm putting the cushion in it. This side looks as though it's fine. I can just add a couple of clips in. I know you can't necessarily see this because I'm trying to get something that's 19 inches square into a small area. And this is nearly finished. And if I've done it right, I should end up with a nice cushion. So again, I'm just going to use the edge of the foot on the edge of my fabric. I'm going to take my last clip out when I get near the end. Make sure I've not got any of the overlocker threads going through onto the other side. And I could pivot and turn the corner, but I'm going to take the whole thing out and start again. And because I'm lining the edge of the foot up with the edge of the fabric, my stitches that I'm doing now in my white thread are coming away from where I've overlocked. So you're not going to see this black thread, hopefully, at all, because it's all going to be in the seam allowance. Now when I get to where the zip is, I'm just going to take this clip out and I'm just going to sew straight over this end, but I'm going to take my time and I'm going to do some backwards and forwards stitches, I think, just to try and secure it. And I've finished off the last side. I'm just going to cut some of the overlocker threads. And I'm just going to open the zip and just double check that everything is all sewn, and it looks as though it is. So now I can cut this excess zip away. So I'm going to use my scissors and cut that away because the zip has been sewn within the seams. So, you know, this excess zip is not needed. Then I'm going to turn it inside out and hopefully I've got a cushion. Got a bit of overlocker thread there. That's the only thing I find when I use the overlocker. You've got to watch where the threads go while you're sewing, because they sometimes, you know, sneak out onto the outside of your fabric, but it's not a problem, they can be cut off. Just going to push these corners out, fasten my zip. Just got a stray thread there, and this one here, cut that off. Let's get my desk a bit more tidy. And that just needs a press, a quick roll over with my lint roller. I think I need to change the paper on that lint roller. But that's my cushion, look at that. So that's from a cushion that I already had, an IKEA cushion that I've had for years that I've not used, but that I couldn't get my big hoop in it to embroider. So I've cut it up and I've made a panel for the front and used the fabric from the cushion and a new zip. And if I wanted to, I could unpick the zip, but I've got bags and bags of zips, so I didn't feel the need to. And then I just need to put my cushion in it, and I've got myself a nice cushion for my computer chair to help support my back. So I hope you like the project. Please give the video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.